Good Friday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your Atlantic Tropical Update. Today, we're mainly focusing on Tropical Storm Fiona that will be impacting land in the short term, the northern Leeward Islands. But I will briefly jump over to the eastern Pacific to talk about another storm. That's Tropical Storm Lester that will be impacting areas on the Pacific side of Mexico, Acapulco area. Today is Friday, September 16th. 2022. Here's an updated scorecard. We're now up to number 13 in the Eastern Pacific with the addition of Lester, and we're sitting at less than half of that. Fiona is our latest addition there. Tropical storm in the Atlantic about to head into the Caribbean. There's also two other waves out there that may develop, low chances of developing over the next 5 days. 10% just off the eastern seaboard, heading away from the seaboard. But there's Bermuda right in that little lobe there. And we've got another wave that's got a 20% chance. You can see the direction that's moving off to the north. And of course, we've got Tropical Storm Fiona. Now, here's the latest update, 1 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center. Largely unchanged. 50-mile-per-hour winds, steady pressure, no fluctuations up or down from that. So it's held itself together despite ongoing wind shear that we can see on visible satellite imagery here. Remember yesterday how dislocated the low-level circulation was from the convective activity? It is still like that, but it is not as dislocated to the east as yesterday, so it's starting to stand up a little bit straighter. There's the low-level exposed center. You can see that there spinning, racing towards areas like Guadalupe, Antigua, and Barbuda. But there's all the convection, all the thunderstorm activity bubbling on up, dislocated to the east of that center there. Now, wind shear is ongoing on this, coming in mainly out of the west from upper level disturbances off to the west of that center there. It should pop up here in just a second, but the upper level winds dislocating all of that convection on off to the east. A lot of dry air surrounding this system as well. This is water vapor imagery. The yellow rust shades is dry air in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. If some of that dry air was to get sucked into the circulation, it would choke it on off. And so far, and really for the entirety of its lifetime with Fiona, has walled itself off from any of that dry air intruding into its circulation. So that's been one benefit of this system, being able to hold itself off from that. Now, we do have radar up, NOAA radar out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, showing some squally type features building on in from the east, pushing to the west. U.S. British Virgin Islands also dealing with some of those tropical-like squalls. This is not associated with Fiona yet. We'll start to see the impacts from there getting into the later parts of the day on Saturday and Sunday. Here's the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. This is as of the 11 a.m. advisory today. We'll get a track adjustment if necessary, coming up with a full advisory that's later on this afternoon. There are 4 of those a day and 4 intermediate advisories. So this stat up here is the intermediate advisory that came out at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 1 o'clock Central, 50-mile-per-hour winds moving due west at 14 miles per hour. Now, going forward throughout about the next 48 hours or so, a pretty straightforward track forecast, almost due west. However, I will mention that so far, Fiona has been verifying south of where the forecast track has been because it's been a little bit weaker than what models have been thinking it would be at. Moves due west pretty much, then picks up a slight west-northwest trajectory as we get into Sunday, passing to the south of the British U.S. Virgin Islands, the south of Puerto Rico. That would put those areas on the dirty side, as we call it, of the storm, meaning some of the strongest of the winds. At this point, they could be sustained at around 60 to 65 miles per hour, and a lot of the heavy flooding rainfall that will likely come with the system as it passes on by. Also, notice its slow movement doesn't cover much ground in 24 hours. Here we are at Saturday morning, and by Sunday morning, it's just south of Puerto Rico. Now, getting into Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, it starts to take that turn north towards the Dominican Republic, heading towards some of the highest terrain in all of the Caribbean. We call this area the shredder, and it tends to shear apart storms that pass over it. If it does survive, or it misses it completely, it'll likely hold itself together much, much better. Regardless, as it emerges off to the north of the Dominican Republic, the Hispaniola area, towards the Turks and Caicos Islands. Conducive conditions here, warm waters, better wind shear environment, not as much dry air, should support it strengthening up to a Category 1 hurricane as it heads towards eastern areas of the Bahamas. So I talked about that high terrain, that's Pico Duarte, highest peak in the entirety of the Caribbean, 10,000 foot elevation here. The track right now takes it on the north side, passing north of Pico Duarte, so it should, central circulation should miss that. But we'll see. Things can fluctuate here. And of course, this is just the center of the cone of uncertainty. It can move on either end of there and only stays within that cone 2/3 of the time. So it can go north or south of the island easily if small variables change over time. So right now, tropical alerts that are up for the Caribbean. We've got tropical storm warnings in all the areas in orange. Yellow is tropical storm watches. Dominica off to the south of Guadalupe. And now Dominican Republic has been added to that with a tropical storm watch. All of Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, all under tropical storm warnings. And that means tropical storm conditions are expected or imminent within the next 36 to 48 hours. I talked about the advisories. 8 of them come out a day, 4 intermediate, 4 full advisories. Our next one coming on up is 4 p.m. With a track update and also an update on the system itself, any changes in intensity, overall pressure, and wind speed. So where do the models see this going? Well, yesterday there was a big spread on our computer models from north to south, east to west. Today, it's a little bit better of a consensus. You see more of our model members here consolidating here, showing that northerly turn, but it still is Bermuda, and there's still some outlying members that take it to Jamaica. So the spread is still there, although we're starting to see some clustering taking place with the models getting a little bit better of a handle of what's going on in the upper levels and the steering pattern that may be in place by the time Fiona reaches Hispaniola. Now, what about the GFS ensemble? This is the GFS model with 30 different members. Each variable in those members is tweaked slightly to get a different outcome. And this is the result. 30 different runs of the GFS. Shows a considerable spread still, but the majority of the members do show that turn north of Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and then pretty much due north. However, some do stray off to the west. Could be a closer call for the East Coast than what's originally anticipated. And then a majority of them take then off to Bermuda, a few outlying members still south of Cuba and towards Jamaica. Now, what about the Euro ensemble? There are more members involved with the Euro. There's 51, so we can run the Euro model 51 different times and see different results. This one is a little more split. Half, I'd say, are going off to the north, heading in between Bermuda and the east coast of the United States. A similar number, a consensus number, going off to the south of Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and in between Cuba and Jamaica here, and potentially even farther to the west. Now, why is that? This is likely the European model, at least some of these model ensemble members, showing a weaker Fiona for longer, meaning it will be tracking farther to the west. These members likely picking up on a stronger Fiona, sensing the upper level steering pattern and taking an exit path. Now, what do I mean by exit path? I'm going to show you the upper level steering in a second, and taking it to the north, potentially impacting areas near Bermuda, or maybe potentially a little bit closer to the U.S. East Coast. Now let's compare the two operational models, the long range GFS and European. We're just looking at all the members, but here's a look at the operational. So we've got the European in the red, the GFS in the yellow here, right up through Sunday. Very similar positioning here. GFS slightly to the north, Euro slightly to the south, and a little bit weaker. Notice how they start to separate a little bit more as we get into the middle to end of next week. GFS has a very strong Fiona. There's Bermuda, getting close to Bermuda at that point in time. Euro says, I think we're going to keep Fiona weaker for longer, so I think it's going to be farther to the south and a little bit farther to the west, sitting right over the Bahamas at this point in time. Going a few more days out to next weekend, Saturday, September the 24th, GFS shoots it off into the North Atlantic past Bermuda. European is well behind this and still has it just north of the Bahamas, sitting as a likely very strong storm just off the east coast of Florida and off the coast of the Carolinas. What will happen, which is right, too early to tell where these will be placed by that point, but that's the divergence in the models as we get that far out into time, and even further out in time. By Monday the 26th, European gets awfully close to the U.S. East Coast. Nothing is set in stone, though. So I talked about the steering patterns. So we've got two ridges of high pressure, one sitting over the central parts of the United States by later this week and into next week. And then we've got a big Bermuda high, a big Azores high sitting over the central Atlantic. In between those two ridges, there's a weakness developing, a trough in the jet stream. You see that dip there and a front along it. This will allow a stronger Fiona to sense the upper level steering and the weakness in those two ridges, the troughiness, and take an exit hatch out to the north, sliding due north in between Bermuda and the east coast of the United States. However, if it's weaker for longer, like we've been seeing so far as the trend, That means it will be tracking farther to the west and potentially not being able to sense that escape hatch and missing it altogether, meaning a farther west track would be more likely in that scenario. Which one's more likely? Too early to tell. Right now, it's remained weaker for a little bit longer than anticipated. If that holds up, has yet to be seen. All right, we talked about this yesterday. Storm analogs, taking the exact position of where Fiona is now, plotting that with past historic storms, and this is what we get. So right now, just to the east of the northern Leeward Islands, storms that have passed within 50 miles of that location. Since records have been kept, this is where they have tracked. A large number of them taking that similar track, like the GFS is showing, the Europeans showing, most models are showing, turning to the north and then towards Bermuda, maybe in between Bermuda and the U.S. East Coast. But there's also a fair amount that track farther to the west and make it into the Gulf. Breaking this down even more into the month of September in general, I think there's a similar spread here. A lot of them take it off to the north, due north, stay out to sea. Some of them take it off towards in the Gulf of Mexico, towards the Yucatan, and towards the Gulf Coast. So we'll see what happens here, where Fiona's line ends up as we go forward. Regardless of where it goes, where it's heading in the next 24 hours is going to be impactful on areas like the northern leewards over to Puerto Rico, U.S. British Virgin Islands. It's going to be a wind and rainmaker. The probability of us seeing at least tropical storm force winds here is nearly a guarantee in Guadeloupe, Antigua, Barbuda. Now, as you get farther out from that storm track, chances drop, or percentage chances drop a bit, but still likely over Puerto Rico, British Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands. Now, when do the tropical storm force winds likely arrive? Well, Barbuda, Antigua likely seeing that by this evening, Friday at 8 o'clock. By Saturday morning, the U.S. Virgin Islands starting to get some of those tropical storm force winds. Puerto Rico by Saturday night, and it looks like Dominican Republic by Sunday night. So this is not a long duration of time here. It's going to be a slow-moving system. So in 48 hours, it's only to the Dominican Republic from where it's currently located. Now, how about rainfall? Flooding rainfall likely anywhere from 6 to 10 to a foot of rain. 6 to 10 inches to a foot of rain possible in some of these areas as we go through that area of time between now and, say, Monday and Tuesday before it lifts north of the Dominican Republic. All right, let's jump over to the Eastern Pacific now. This is Tropical Storm Lester. Minimal grade, barely a tropical storm. As you can see from this and where it's plotted, it is dealing with some shear as well. This time it's coming in from the east and blowing the convection off towards the west of the system there. Moving to the northwest at 12, the track on it does put it into Acapulco. So tropical storm warnings are up there for the coastline of Mexico, the Pacific coast, and north of that and south of that, tropical storm watches. Should get winds up to around 60 miles per hour, so a mid-grade tropical storm as it makes landfall later in the evening tomorrow near the Acapulco area. So my final thoughts here with Tropical Storm Fiona. Although better model guidance and consensus today, many questions still remain, and a lot of those questions will not be answered anytime soon. Fiona has been verifying south of the forecast track, like I mentioned, that could have implications down the road on where it tracks and if it's able to sense that escape hatch lifting it to the north, and also if it's able to intensify like the models are projecting. Now, short-term intensity trends may shed some better light on the future of the storm. If we start to see it really intensify and stand up straight and not be so heavily sheared, it might take that turn to the north a little bit sooner. If it doesn't, it might take it later. So that's all going to be dependent on that, and we'll have to see how all these trends play out over the next 48 hours or so. So until next time, you can find me on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and also on TikTok at Tim Talk Weather. Enjoy your Friday and your weekend.